We are recording. My name is Joshua Waits. I'm the archivist here at Virginia Theological Seminary. Today is April 20th, 2023 at approximately 1:20 p.m. I am here with Reverend Jerry Anderson, who is here to give his oral history for the Called and Holy LGBT Oral History Project. Thank you, Reverend Anderson, for being here.
This is an answer to prayer. I've been praying for something like this to happen for a long time.
So let's start with just some basic biographical information. Would you mind telling your full name?
Jerry Ray Anderson.
All right. Do you have a preferred way to be addressed as far as your name, Reverend, Doctor?
Jerry's fine.
Jerry? All right. How do you identify, and do you have preferred pronouns?
Well, I identify as gay, and I sort of like the idea of queer being reclaimed. I have not settled on the pronouns.
Okay.
All of them, I guess. I don't know. I'm open to.
All right.
Yeah.
When and where were you born?
I was born in a town in the extreme southern part of Illinois, Herrin. That's Herrin. Most people don't know it, but it's where I was born. And did you say when?
When?
March 25th, 1942.
All right. Having perused your memoirs, you say you grew up the son of a Pentecostal preacher who was a coal miner by day.
That's true.
Would you tell us some about your growing up in that tradition and what it was like for you?
Well, looking back on it, the people in the congregation were lovely people, and it was a very tight community. And we were in church every time the doors were open. My father was the assistant at parish or church where we grew up. He led the testimonial service and the singing, and he was sort of the warm-up act, I would say. And he also taught the men's Bible college, men's Bible class. And he never felt like he wanted to have his own church, although he toyed with that. But I also, as a child, we were the old-fashioned holiness Pentecostals. And as a child, I can remember, I don't know why, but every school year, they wanted you to put your religious preference. And I thought, they all know, what do I have to write Pentecostal again? And I knew people made fun of us because of the shouting and all that sort of thing. What was the question?
Just
how was it growing up there?
What was it like to grow up in that tradition?
Okay, about by the time I'm 16 or my teens, and of course this is 1950, I was keenly aware of the issues with segregation and integration. Of course, television was portraying horrible things in the South, but I also grew up in a sundown town. No blacks could enter after sunset. So I became very aware of all of that. And in 1957 was a huge integration battle in Little Rock, Arkansas. Central High School, they were trying to integrate it, and there was all this violent protest, and that's when President Eisenhower sent in federal troops. Well, I was riveted with all that and watching it on television. And so the next year, my parents and some other people from the church went to Little Rock for a United Pentecostal Church convention. And I just turned 16, so I could drive. And so I borrowed the car and went out to just see Central High School. Things had calmed down. It was such an iconic image, and which I did. And then I came back, and the most important issue before the convention was whether we could own television sets. And they finally compromised and said, well, they couldn't enforce it with the laity because, sister so-and-so might have a husband. didn't belong to the church and it could become a wedge issue for them or something. But the clergy could not own television. And I thought, there's something wrong with this. So I think that emotionally began my desire to get out. The other thing was I was terrified I was going to become a coal miner. My brother became a coal miner. I even have nephews younger than I who became coal miners, and I was plotting on how I was going to get out of the coal fields. So I was motivated, but I didn't know anything about the Episcopal Church. There wasn't an Episcopal Church in my hometown.
Now, was this like Congregational Holiness Church or Assemblies of God, Church of God?
It was the United Pentecostal Church, which is a denomination in and of itself.
Right.
They are Jesus only.
So oneness.
Pentecostal. They are baptized in the name of Jesus only. That separated them out. But they also were very much holiness, about dress and all that,
Which, yes, because I saw in your book where you had to have the provisional baptism. If you have not been baptized, I baptize you.
In the Episcopal Church. When I got Father Harris, who was the rector of the church, I found the Episcopal Church actually the year I was in Bible college. And there were these Episcopalians speaking in tongues. I thought, it's interesting. So I began to research the Episcopal Church. And when I ended up back at Southern Illinois University, I'd done 1 year there and then went to Bible college in Texas. And actually, at Bible college, I discovered I was gay in 1961. I mean, for no other reason, it was good that I went down there, but it was also a miserable year. So anyway, when I came back, I found the Episcopal Church. And by that time, I knew I couldn't be a Pentecostal preacher, although I was struggling with the possibility of ministry, but I thought I was going to be a lawyer and a politician and do good works that way. So when I discovered the Episcopal Church and fell in love with it, and then discovered there were gay priests in the closet, pretending, I thought, oh, maybe all this could come together for me. So then I began to talk about seminary, and Father Harris said, well, when it comes time for you to be ordained, you're going to have to show proof of your baptism. And he said, I would hate for that to be an issue. So, yeah, I was conditionally baptized on Holy Saturday. But, being classic Episcopalian, they just didn't assume I wasn't baptized. They didn't want to offend anybody. So if you have not already been baptized, I'm now baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. So that that made me legit if I wasn't already.
Which Bible college did you go to?
Well, it was a little known Bible college called the International Bible College in San Antonio, founded by a Pentecostal missionary who was kicked out of Japan, World War II, and came and started this Bible college. And when I was there, his son, David Coop, the senior Coop was dead, was running it. And he's the one who one day handed me this magazine, said, oh, this might appeal to you. And it was a magazine published by the Charismatics at St. Mark's, Van Nuys, California. Dennis Bennett, who was one of the personalities that emerged out of all that. And they had very good artwork. And it was a slick magazine. I thought, my God, who are these Episcopalians? Yeah.
Do you, so it was from there that you were introduced to the Episcopal Church, and then when you left the college, you then started attending the Episcopal Church?
Well, actually, what happened was I was miserable, but I couldn't go back home right away because they had, I just rededicated myself to Jesus in the summer of '61 after my first year of seminary at college. And so and they had raised some money and they were prophesying I was going to be a preacher and all this sort of stuff. So the person who introduced me to the homosexual world was kicked out 2 weeks after I'd gotten there, or we'd gotten there. And they almost kicked me out because we had told a lie and said that we were going out to dinner with his parents who were coming down from Shreveport. And instead of his parents, we went out with two of his cute gay friends. And they took me to a gay bar and also told me about famous people who were gay and all this other stuff. And I made out with one of them on the way back to Hallelujah Hill, which is where the Bible College was. Anyway, they didn't kick me out because they were afraid. They told me that I'd go back to that godless university and be lost forever. So at the end of that year, my uncle, my dad's younger brother, who was a Pentecostal preacher in California, he and his wife invited me to come out there. And I think my uncle really thought I might study for the ministry under him. So that summer in a small town, there was an Episcopal church, and I read in the newspaper that there was a charismatic priest preaching at St. Matthias, Oakdale, California, that next Sunday. And my uncle allowed me to go to the 8 o'clock mass to hear the sermon. And I instantly loved the Episcopal church. So I would go over, I was working in a Western auto store, and I'd go over, it was about a block from where I was working, and sit in my lunch hour. Then the other thing that happened was I had a date with a girl, and one parent was Roman Catholic and one was Episcopal. And when I got home that night, my uncle was furious with me. Now, of course, I've got this secret that I'm trying to make sense out of. Furious with me, I dated somebody outside the true faith. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to get out of here. I cried myself to sleep there. I mean, and the next day said, I'm going back to Southern Illinois University and going home. So that launched me back, and I found the Episcopal Church immediately and never looked back.
And my grandmother was raised Congregational Holiness.
Really is.
This was in Cedartown, Georgia. So it's just at the beginning of the Appalachian Mountains in Georgia.
I've never heard of Congregational Holiness.
They were an offshoot of the Assemblies of God that rejected bishops.
They probably were Trinitarian then.
They were Trinitarian.
Yeah, because the Assemblies of God, United Pentecostal broke away from the Trinitarians back in, I think, 1950 or something.
And I remember when I started attending the Episcopal Church. And my mother told my grandmother,
Yes.
which I was, we were Baptists, not.
How old were you?
Well, I was 25.
Oh.
But my grandmother's response was, well, I don't know many Episcopalians, but I do know they're good people.
Oh, shit.
She said. And my mother came to the Episcopal Church's defense, and she said, well, I'll say this much for the Episcopal Church. When those people say they pray, they pray. And I went, you know what, there's worse things that could be said to describe your church.
Rather flattering.
Right. To which my grandmother went, well, that's what matters. Is that I'm like, okay. She's 85 now. And the older she gets, the more holiness she becomes, you know. But so you come into the Episcopal Church, you receive conditional baptism. Was that all in preparing for discernment to the priesthood?
Well, it was going on at the same time. Yeah, I don't know quite when. Well, I probably didn't make up my mind until the standing committee of the Diocese of Springfield accepted me in late '64. I think it was. Yeah.
And you ended up attending general. So What really played into your decisions to attend general as your seminary?
Well, my Bishop Chambers, was a general graduate. And I didn't want to stay in the Midwest. I knew that.
Mm.
I have an adventurous spirit. So I said to him, I'd really like to go to England seminary. And he said, well, that'd be the dramatic thing to do. I think you should go to general. Well, that is fine with me.
Well, it is the high church seminary.
Well, for decades, they tried to play the middle ground somewhat, because they were the seminary of the church. Machado House is really the high church seminary. Yeah.
Well, and Machado House is now becoming not only the high church, but the conservative one.
And they've lost their minds.
Which is interesting because Virginia was always known as the low evangelical, and now it's and conservative, and now it's more of the progressive broad.
Thank God. Well, of course, Virginia was, our great rival.
Right.
And they always beat us in sports. So football and basketball. So we used to say, well, Virginia has a great athletic program. But I mean, thank God that Virginia is doing what it's doing.
So what was it like being at general? Were you able to be more open about your sexuality?
It was. But we still played, games with people. We were, but there were enough of us who were gay to have close fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there were others who were trying to figure out which way they were going, and they were trying to figure out which way we were going. So it was that, of course, was this, at Southern University, it was just a small group of us, and we were pretty much scared. But so general was a much more affirming place for me.
Yeah. And what year did you start? At
65, graduated in 68.
So this was all pre-Stonewall.
Oh God, yes. Pre-Stonewall, pre-hair. Remember, it came out, I think, in 69. I'm sorry. There's another point I can't remember, but and I didn't. I mean, I and my friends really didn't go to gay bars.
Mm-hmm.
It hadn't. Gay bars are still sort of not a place where you hung out a lot. That all the discos really took off in the early 60s, and then everything took off. Did I say 60s? Early 70s, and it became much freer. Everything was breaking loose. And,
so when you were at general, it's really sort of the time of the let's mess up their name. Mattachine Society?
Well, Mattachine was in the 50s.
Right.
And they were very small. And I don't know when I first became aware of them, but I mean, they were kind of an esoteric group. It seemed like in the big city, or back, I don't know. There wasn't anything that it occurred to me I should belong to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said you had sort of this pocket of friends. But you didn't really attend the gay bars, which
I went to 2 gay bars in the 3 years I was there, and with different friends, and didn't feel like it was something. I mean, Stonewall was right there. I never went to Stonewall. Could have, but it wasn't. It was like we didn't need it. We had enough socializing. I think there were seminarians who did, but not not guys I hung around with.
So you pretty much was staying in this network
Mhm.
at the seminary,
Mhm.
was your queer community, as
Right.
it were. you graduate in 68.
Mhm.
Did you go back to your diocese, or did you go straight to Washington, D.C.?
I was, no, I was ordained a deacon in Springfield, Southern Illinois. But my first position was as a curate in a suburb of Chicago.
Right.
So I ended up in Chicago, which is, again, I was happy.
So what was so wonderful about Chicago?
Well, it was a big city.
Hmm.
It wasn't a small town in Southern Illinois. And I fell in love with New York. I mean, that was light years away from where I had been. And then, but I also loved the rector I worked for. I loved the parish. I was 26 when I was ordained and youth director, and that was when young people were doing all sorts of crazy things, challenging the system, the family, and so on and so forth, their families, and so on and so forth. So it was a wonderful, almost 5 years.
So you were ordained. So you were ordained a priest in 68 as well,
Deacon in June and priesting was in Chicago.
and the priesting was in Chicago in December.
Yes,
All right.
28. I
Um,
mean, sorry, 20. I'm talking about 20.
and you were the associate. No, you were a curate.
I started off as curate and as assistant rector a couple years later.
And then assigned the youth ministries.
That was my primary focus. Yeah.
So you were dealing with youth ministries during not so much civil rights movement, but still dealing with Vietnam. And,
Well, civil rights was still going on, but Vietnam was huge, and hippies and long hair and all that, and kids acting out, going off to hippie communes and so on and so forth. It was quite an exciting time to try to corral these kids.
Right.
And a lot of parents not happy,
Right.
And but in terms of the sexual thing, I was living in the closet.
So you were living in the closet.
I was pretending to be straight.
Mm. And then in 69, Stonewall happens. Did that, which of course, cascades very quickly. I think in 1970 was the first Pride Parade, and then it starts to spread throughout the country. So while you were working in Chicago with these youth ministries, was your congregation having to deal with now this rising gay rights movement?
I don't think it was on the radar for most people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your corralling for the concerns of these parents was not so much sexuality issues. It was my kids protesting Vietnam or growing their hair long or experimenting with drugs.
Right.
And so that's what you were shepherding at that
Mostly,
time.
yeah. I think looking back, there are only a couple, only a couple of those kids who confessed to me they were gay.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't a huge issue at that
Okay. So what brought you to DC?
Well, we should just tag the fact that after my parish in Wilmette, I went and did hospital chaplaincy work.
Okay.
And did actually 13 units of CPE.
13.
I know, that's exactly what I don't tell people because clergy look at me like I've lost my mind. But I ended up doing that and working at Bishop Anderson House, which was Episcopal chaplaincy, and going to psychotherapy during that time and getting my head straight about me, and that my father hadn't made me gay, not being emotionally distant and all that sort of stuff, and really getting over my internalized homophobia. So, and that allowed me to fall in love. Well, I'd fallen in love before, but I fell in love with somebody that it wasn't in an insane, relationship. And that person, Terry, was living in Washington, but he moved in 75 to be with me in Chicago. And then about the time my CPE was ending, he got a very good job back in Washington. And so we moved to Washington. And the whole thing for me at that time, in regards to my story and my sexuality, was I thought I can't live in the closet again. But how am I going to find work? And so that became a big issue with me personally. So I ended up working on Capitol Hill and in the senator's office, and then went back to Illinois and worked on the political campaign. And by this time it's 1979, and I did some interviewing, and I thought, if they get to know me well enough and find out the truth, I'll have to. I won't get the job. So I think the Holy Spirit was at work, and Jim Steen, who became rector of St. Patrick's, Washington, in August of '79, he and I had been in seminary together, and he was a year behind me. And while we liked each other, and we weren't really that close, so when he got to St. Patrick's, I called and said, "Let's have lunch." So we were having lunch in like October, I think it was. And in the middle of lunch, he said to me, I need help. I have a little bit of money. Why don't you come and work for me? And I started crying. I mean, it was totally out of left field. I didn't see it coming. So that, I like to say, I slid through the back door of St. Patrick's in '79. And by early '81, the parish had grown in numbers and income and all that. The pastor decided, do we get into this story? Because that leads me to the Virginia Seminary.
Well, let me ask some follow-ups. First, just this one is just brief. Could you tell us what senator you worked for?
Adlai Stevenson
Oh,
from Illinois. Yeah, the son of the presidential candidate.
all right. Because I think this particular quote will lead us into Virginia and to your coming out at St. Patrick's.
Okay.
In your book, you say, "Without the value I place on my relationship with Carrie, I doubt I would have been prepared to risk falling on my sword professionally as I did in coming out to the congregation at St. Patrick's."
Right. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about Terry?
Sure. The process, once you accept yourself as being gay, and you're not playing games and, hiding or whatever, and you really do accept yourself, and you really do think, my God, I have value, I'm no longer dominated by shame, and then love comes genuinely. I mean, it's the sort of thing that you would fall on your sword for. I mean, that you'd die for. That I'm not going to put up with that crap again, sort of thing. So that's the state of mind I was in, and we were having a great relationship and a lot of fun and so on and so forth. And I wasn't going to dishonor that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Certainly.
Yeah.
And what role were you playing at St. Patrick's?
Well, I was considered the assistant rector. I did a lot of pastoral work, weddings. I also had the youth group, although it wasn't as large as the one in my first parish. And preaching and sacramental work and so on and so forth. Yeah.
All right. So now we can go into, before you go into sort of your coming out at St. Patrick's and of course the subsequent traumas that will follow that.
Right.
Can you tell us what brought you into working with VTS?
I mean, by working with.
Well, because you were supervising seminarians.
Well, I hadn't. I was in the rector. I hadn't had a formal relationship with students, but we certainly had students that I was involved with. Yeah.
All right. So you had not become a supervisor of.
Not officially, no.
All right. But that was certainly the plan, was to get
Mhm.
you
Oh, sure.
recognized as
I
a
mean, I had all that CPE supervision.
right. At this point in CPE, you could be the bishop of all chaplains.
Well, yeah, I don't think I'm going to strive for that. But could I tell you though, before we get to 81, I moved here and I heard that here, the seminary, this is the first time I was at the seminary. I heard that there was going to be a debate
Mm.
here between, the founder of Integrity, Louis Crew,
Mhm,
and David Scott.
mhm.
And so I just came over. I didn't know any students then or anybody then. And it was in your Scott Lounge,
Yes.
and the place was full of people one afternoon. And, it was a lively debate and discussion. And the sentiment of, I would say, the majority of the students was on David Scott's side. I didn't talk to anybody and I left, and I felt that old shame again
Mm.
that came over me. That, you're not worthy of what you're asking for, et cetera, et cetera. That was my first time at Virginia Seminary. So
Your
that
first experience was a debate
you're right,
on
exactly.
your dignity as a human being. as it
that
were.
was involved, yes, right.
Wow. So, and that was in 1980?
No, well, I think it's more like 78 or 79.
Right.
So I don't have it.
Okay. Because because you worked for several years in DC before going.
Yeah,
on
it was
to-
before I went to St. Patrick's, I know that.
All right. Did the rector? So you said the rector knew that you were gay.
Yeah. And we agreed. I said, well, so in early January, they had enough money to have a full-time assistant.
Mhm.
And I was going to be considered. And that's when I said, Jim, if I'm going to do this, they need to know what's going on. I do not ever want to go back into the closet.
Right.
So that became interesting because there were a group of women who wanted a woman priest.
Mm.
And that put me in an awkward position because I had been very much for the ordination of women. And it never occurred to me I might end up competing, but there I was. And so they had a meeting in January, and it was a very long, stormy meeting. It went till after midnight. And Jim called me and said, they decided they're going to come back in 2 weeks and decide. They want to talk to the parish. Well, I wasn't at the meeting, but I certainly heard stories. And there was one exchange for one of the women who was for a woman priest, said, when are we finally going to take a risk and hire a woman? Well, a Christian by the name of Tucker Battle, who's gone to his reward, said, risk, what do you mean risk? I've got 3 sons in the youth group. You don't want to hire a homosexual, so they were really into it.
Mm.
But they came back in 2 weeks. I very much felt like I was hanging in suspense, and voted me in. There were 3 women who voted against me, all of whom became friends of mine. But anyway, I was in, and it felt wonderful. I mean, I truly felt like a huge weight had been taken off me, like I was breathing deeper than I'd ever breathed in my life. It was a wonderful moment for me.
Did Bishop Walker know?
Yes, yeah, he signed off on it. Yes.
Okay. So before any official coming out, there was this conversation with the rector,
Mhm.
conversation with Bishop Walker,
Right.
and then eventually there's the conversation with the congregation.
Right.
And now you are free to live your life out as a
Right.
gay man and as a priest.
Right. And I actually preached the Sunday after the vote, and I had the sensation like I was standing there naked. Oh my God. And some voice said to me, but they're not running away. And I sort of relaxed.
Mm.
Yeah.
So how can you explain to me then, how does VTS come into making a determination about your ability to supervise students when you had not officially become a supervisor anyway?
Right.
Was it, did you apply to become a supervisor?
I don't think so. What I remember is, I'm breathing deeply, we're all celebrating, and 2 months later, the call came from the director of pastoral supervision fieldwork and said, I need to come and see you. Jim called the director, and he came, and I mean, it was a shock. I mean, nobody had thought this through in terms of further ramifications. And he said, I don't agree with the policy, but I have to enforce it. Well, what happened was because then the debate or the issue was in a much broader arena, and there were people taking sides here, etc. And then the chancellor of the diocese, David Spears, who was a parishioner, took me aside the following Sunday and said, the bishop does not want to deal with this issue in the Washington Post while the primates are in town. Well, all the Anglican primates were meeting at the Washington Cathedral. Prince Charles was here to read a lesson at Evensong. And I mean, we weren't calling the Washington Post, but I mean, I'm going, oh my God. And then, does the name Bill Wendt mean anything to you? Well, Bill Wendt had been put on trial about 3 years before this for allowing St. Stephen's Incarnation to be used ordained for women before we had officially approved it on the national church level. And Bishop Creighton told him he didn't give him permission to do that. He went ahead and did it. So they put Bill on trial. So he says to me, David says to me, all it would take is for 4 priests to bring moral charges against you, and we'd have to have a trial. God, nobody thought anything like this. So that really got my attention. Well, fortunately, the Washington Post didn't decide to write a story about it or find out about it, and the primates left town, and I was not put on trial.
Yeah, which is very interesting because Bill Wendt, we hold in the archives John Walker's papers.
Oh, you do?
And one of the papers is the trial,
of course,
of Bill Wendt.
I would have. Oh, okay. Yeah.
But which is interesting because the final straw that actually is the case that goes before is that he allowed VTS graduate and one of the Philadelphia 11, Allison Cheek, to celebrate the Eucharist, and that's listed in the charges against him.
Oh, was it?
So.
Well, is there a copy of the picture of one of them being carried around the church? There were 2 or 3 priests carried one of the women, and that was blasted all over the press.
Oh no, I don't have that in the archives.
Okay.
But so all of that was going on, and of course Bishop Walker was very much aware of it.
Right.
But you say, you're talking about how there's these Anglican primates, but you also say that Bishop Walker could have been more aggressive in supporting you.
Well, that was my feeling all along. I mean, he certainly didn't ban me or say I couldn't come to the diocese or anything. And he, he would from time to time offer verbal support. But I never felt like it was his top issue or that he wanted to fight for this. One of the regrets I have is that I didn't organize a group of folks to come over here and picket the seminary at graduation or something. It didn't force it a little more public as time went on, because other priests were at it.
your book says that the rules that was laid out from BTS was that you could not supervise, but
Right.
other priests at St. Patrick's still could.
Right.
So they were perfectly, the compromise is always the case, is that BTS was fine with you still being a priest in that church.
Well, they can do anything about that, but
So, but they weren't going to pull supervision
I
status
was
from
told,
that board.
what we were told was that fieldwork supervisors were considered adjunct faculty,
Mhm.
and which I had heard that before. But anyway, as adjunct faculty, I had to comply to the rule.
Right.
That's what.
Yes, that was when that was one of the policy changes that took place before the admissions policy change in '96, was that when in the '80s, when General Convention said that being homosexual was not a barrier to ordination. That of course became a question here, that the BTS could not control who bishops ordained.
Right. Even though they might want to.
Right, and so they were going to come into this situation again that they had come into with you.
Oh,
And the policy was then changed to where field supervisors would not be considered adjunct faculty.
oh, I missed that one.
Yeah, that was that was how they changed the
Oh.
policy. That was in the late '80s.
That didn't get explained to me. By then I'm doing the chaplaincy work. I think
Right.
as students, I didn't know that.
But yeah, so they did change that policy before they changed the official thing.
Right. Priest and allowing students to be supervised?
From what I understand from reading the policy, that by making it to where field supervisors were no longer adjunct, they didn't have to ask the question.
Oh. You mean I could have been supervising
At some point in time, probably.
before the policy got changed?
Before 1996, probably.
Oh, we don't. Because I had when I was doing the chaplaincy work, I had an intern come from Episcopal Divinity. He was a wonderful guy. I'm trying to think who else. Well, that's interesting.
So, in spite of Bishop Walker's, say, restrained support, you still helped produce the video for his sort of bid for
Right.
presiding bishop.
Right.
And then, of course, tragically, he passes away.
Right.
And then this new disease starts spreading, that has been going through, and you shift your ministry to focus on AIDS.
Right.
Would you talk about that shift?
Well, let me just put in there. So when it became publicly known that I was gay at St. Patrick's, one of the wonderful things that happened was I even had rectors sending gay parishioners to see me, and or they came on their own, and that felt very good to me. And we ended up having two different lesbians. One is Joan Beilstein, who had grown up at St. David's in Palisades, and she went to see a rector saying she wanted to go to seminary, and he wouldn't support her whether she was a lesbian. And so Jane Dixon said, "Go and see Jerry Anderson." Well, she became a parishioner, and she ended up being ordained. Another one was Susan Anderson Smith, who had grown up in Mississippi and as an Episcopalian, and had gone to Sewanee and went to her bishop in the early '80s And again, he wouldn't support it because she was a lesbian. And Terry and I bought a house here in Alexandria in early '85, not far from here. And she was our mortgage broker. And she was not going to church. And was mad. And I said, well, Susan, you need to come to St. Patrick's. Well, she and her then partner came to St. Patrick's, and her partner was the first person baptized in the new church. And she went off to seminary, and she's a priest now in the church. I had a young man come to me. He was an organist at the Falls Church.
Right.
This is in early '80s.
Okay.
And he, the rector there was one of the charismatics who was very much against gays. And he discovered this guy perhaps was gay and told him that if he had, it sounded like the seminary talking to a seminarian, that he had to get into therapy. And if he didn't solve his problem, he couldn't be the organist and choirmaster there. Well, he did some therapy, and then he proposed to one of the women in the choir, and they got married. And he said at the reception, when they were feeding each other cake, he got nauseated and went in the bathroom and threw up. So I began to be a pastor to a number of people. And then my first friend died of AIDS in '83. So I was out for a couple of years. And that drumbeat continued. And by '86, I mean, I'd had a couple of friends say, why don't you start an AIDS ministry? And I'd say, I couldn't do that full time, it'd kill me. And then I was brought to my knees, and I realized I had to do it and could do it. And immediately went up to Bishop Walker and told him I wanted to start creating an AIDS ministry, and he gave me his blessing, and we were off and running. And the sport came in, and I think part of it was because I had come out and had garnered support and gave me confidence. I think I was able to really do what I did then. And the other thing that occurred to me, after all that CPE, when I was back in the ministry, I thought, oh, that was overkill. You know, well, I now see, I believe that the Holy Spirit knew what she was doing, because I don't think I could have spent all those years doing the AIDS work if I hadn't had that training. I think I would have been done in sooner. Yeah.
So you begin this AIDS chaplaincy work. How was that? How did you structure that work? Like, were you just working with certain hospitals? Were you
I was sort
freelance?
of considered chaplain at large. How ECRA, the Episcopal Caring Response, got formed was that there were 16 parishes in 1986 that had raised money. Sanford Garner, who was the rector of Christ Church Georgetown, had a young man die of AIDS, and he got galvanized, and he pulled together a committee, and 16 parishes sent a representative, Episcopal parishes. And they decided to raise money, and through the Whitman Walker Clinic, fund the first residence for men with AIDS. And it was named after Michael Haas, who was an Episcopal organist who had died of AIDS in like '84 or something. So that was the first, and then as that was happening, was when I went to the bishop. So then that committee came up with the idea of creating an organization, non-profit organization. So we started out with 32 board members, because we said any parish that supported us financially could send 2 board members. That turned out to be problematic, but as time went on, and because it was amazing how much support came. And so I was, by the summer of '87, had a full-time, well, I was part-time working out of my house. And then by the end of '87, I was paid full-time. And then we worked at a good interfaith group of people, and we did our first interfaith AIDS retreat in the fall of '87, and there were 27 then men there, all white, everybody gay except one. We also in '87 had an interfaith AIDS conference at Wesley Theological Seminary. Tony Fauci was on the board, on the panel. Diane Ream was a moderator, the NPR personality. He would have been a parishioner of mine at St. Patrick's. But Diane ended up having me on her radio talk show, both as a gay person talking about being gay, and then we did AIDS programs too. Anyway, it just took off. It was a wonderful experience. It was incredibly, at times, difficult.
Amongst the people that you cared for, were any of them Episcopal clergy?
I had my first Episcopal priest friend from seminary days die in '84. He was in New York. And then Mills Onley, a wonderful guy. And I'm trying to think, Michael Coons, who was in seminary with me, died in probably '88, something like that. There were none. Well, I'm taking it back. There was one in Washington who died, but he was pretty much in the closet about it. Probably in the 80s. I had a dear friend, Bill Barkus from San Francisco, who died in '91. I mean, there were definitely priests around. But I'm having to dig through. There was a Roman Catholic priest that got involved with our retreats who died of AIDS. But none that leap out at me right now.
Yeah, because one of my thoughts when I was going through here was, one of the ironies would be if all of a sudden you're now chaplain to a VTS graduate.
Oh, well, that would have been an interesting part of the story, wouldn't it?
That you don't believe that there was.
I can't think of any students. There was a student at Wesley Theological Seminary who became very much a part of my ministry, and he was an artist and the son of a Baptist preacher. He was there getting a master's in theology and art, and he loved doing provocative paintings. In fact, he painted this painting on the front.
Yes.
He painted that at St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town. We teamed up with the AIDS ministry out of St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town. We had a companion, the diocese had a companion relationship with Cape Town. And they took Max Lawton and Nolfi Colleen, who was a member of my flock, who was a stand-up comic and drag queen. They flew them down there for World AIDS Day, and Max painted this painting while he was there that got criticized. There was a little article in the paper, and a Dutch Reformed minister criticized it as being blasphemous, which generated more attention. And then somebody called and said they were coming to the cathedral to destroy it. And anyway, at some point, Bishop Desmond Tutu defended it, but made it an international story. But Max is wonderful. He lived, oh God, how old Max lived? Probably 10 years or so, and struggling with AIDS and doing his artwork. but I don't ever remember, be interesting, if there was a student here
Mm.
who got sick. I recently had dinner with a priest who was a general in the 80s. And in fact, he came down and did a year's a parish internship, which I supervised from general in 83 years, something like that. And he said that he had friends at general who died
Mm.
up here. That would have been, you know, right timing on that.
Because, you know, I think there's no way that just statistically, it would be very odd if our institution wasn't touched by AIDS in some
Mhm.
way.
It'd be interesting to keep your ears out for that.
Mhm. So, one of the things that you did, and you talk about in your book, is you arrange for sort of the AIDS memorial service when
That was the first one.
yeah, when the quilt comes,
Yeah, that was in 88.
and you talk about how, you know, there was discussion about whether or not um, parts of the
Gay
quilt
Men's Chorus.
of the Gay Men's Chorus could perform in the cathedral.
Mm.
Can you describe sort of the process of getting that together and what difficulties you may have had and what blessings may have come out of it?
Yeah. You know, we knew in 87, we knew that St. John the Divine and Grace Cathedral in San Francisco both had had some sort of an AIDS shrine in one of their chapels where people could go and light candles and pray.
Mm-hmm.
So a group of us went up, made an appointment, went up to see Provost Eugene Perry. Eugene, no, I'm getting the, what was his first name? Provost Perry. And his first name was.
Charles?
Charles, thank you. Yes, Charles. And we knew he was homophobic, but we went, and we even took one of the Episcopal Blue Bloods of Washington with us, whose son had died of AIDS. He was the one who had died of AIDS at Christ Church, Georgetown in '86, and he had served Peter Gilson. He had served on the cathedral chapel. He took Charles with us. I mean, Peter with us. Well, I had come over here, by the way, and earlier in April, in the 80s, and met with Dean Wood. No, Dean, the second Dean.
Dean Reed.
Reed. And then I came over and saw the chaplain in Churchill. Perry was the same way. It was like talking to a post. There was no passion whatsoever, and it never went anywhere. So we'd had that experience. So now it's 88, and the quilt's coming, and we are excited, and we form a committee, and we go up and meet with one of the canons. And this lovely woman from Christ Church, Georgetown, singing in the choir, was going through the order of service we put together. And when she got to, and here the Gay Men's Chorus will sing the solo, the canon turned pink. I mean, he looked very anxious. He said, "Oh, I don't know if that can happen. I'll have to talk with the provost." Well, I sat there and I thought, "Oh my God, I can't believe this." And so it went on. We waited for months, and the Gay Men's Chorus was getting anxious and threatening not to even come. And I said, "Well, they haven't said you can't be in the service, or you can walk, you can process in your tuxedos, whatever." Well, finally, a couple of weeks before the event, they made an appointment with the bishop, and the bishop actually concurred that they couldn't sing a solo, but he wanted them there, and they decided to come, which was a huge relief. And then 2 years later, the quilt came back and we had another service. And by then, Bishop Walker is dead and Provost Berry is gone, and they sang a solo. But it was, I mean, and the cathedral was packed to overflowing from people all over the world. And we had healing stations around the nave, and it was a wonderful, that was back in '88, a wonderful service.
Mhm. Can you talk about your, I guess you could say, friendship with First Lady Barbara Bush?
Oh, well, I came to be one of her fans. 2 weeks after President Bush was made president in he was inaugurated in '89. A woman who was a parishioner at St. John's, Georgetown, was on her staff, and like 2 weeks later called me and said the First Lady wants to put AIDS at the top of one of her top priorities. Can you help us? Of course we can. So yes, she was incredibly supportive. She did several AIDS events. We decided that maybe the first one should be going to grandma's house, which had children with AIDS. And but we had 2 gala fundraisers, Echo did, and she was on her chair. She was very genuine. We met with her and so on and so forth. I mean, I had not thought much about her up until then, but I really became a fan. And Tony Fauci recently said that her son, George W., when he was president, did more for AIDS than any other of the presidents he worked with. And it had to do with all that money that was assigned to Africa. And therefore, AIDS vaccines and so on and so forth. And I thought his mother was whispering in his ear.
So while we're still talking about First Ladies and the memorial quilt, were you here in the, let's see, it was I believe during President Clinton's first term when the full quilt was placed on the mall.
Yes.
And they became the first president and first lady to actually go and view the quilt.
Right.
Were you in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I marched with the AIDS Coalition in his first inaugural parade. And the quilt, see, that was in '92, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And then was it '96 that the quilt was all? It was '96 that the quilt filled the whole mall. I have a good friend who's an Episcopalian, who's a longtime AIDS survivor, who told me that they lived in New Mexico, and his partner worked for Governor Richardson, who's a big Democrat in Clinton's administration. The 2 of them were at some sort of reception down there, and Hillary was there. And he said, I went over to her and I said, I want to thank you because your husband saved my life. And his story is that when the Clintons went to the mall, that he came back to the White House and called NIH and said, I know you have certain medications that are in the pipeline. I think you need to release them. And my friend began one of the protocols and turned them around, everything.
Wow. Yeah, so if I'm correct, the way I've heard it was that there was sort of an impromptu visit to the quilt by the president.
I'm not sure. Somebody must have been advising. Yeah.
So that it wasn't part of the official
Could very well have been
thing that the president, and from what I understand, it time First Lady Clinton,
Could very well
who
be.
was like, "We're going to see."
Yeah. Well, she gave him a hug, and he said, "I cried in her arms."
Mm.
Yeah, it was a very meaningful thing. You know, there's something that we haven't talked about, which has to do with the seminary, is coming here and doing a workshop on AIDS.
So yes, so please tell us about that.
After I started the AIDS ministry, I tried to generate interest to come and speak. The Episcopal High School next door, the chaplain invited me, and I went and spoke to the student body. St. Albans School, they invited me to come and speak, and we couldn't get the seminary interested.
Mm.
Well, this would have been in '89, I guess. Yeah, there were. Well, Jean Rogers was a student here, middle-aged woman. The Bishop Dean Wolf, who was Bishop of Kansas, is now rector of St. Bartholomew's in Manhattan. He was a part of that student body. Anyway, some of that group of, I considered a little more mature students, put together a conference, a Friday night, Saturday conference, and just made it happen. And my lover at that time, who had AIDS, Terry and I had split after 13 years. We were on the panel, and we had other people on the panel, and I celebrated the Eucharist in the chapel, the old chapel, on Friday evening, and so on and so forth. And then Saturday we had workshops all day. And Jean Rogers, who's going to talk to on the phone, told me that and I didn't know it at the time, that they were told that we, the participants, shouldn't be eating in the refectory. But she said we made it happen. But she said the only faculty who came was David Scott, sat in the back of the room. But that was a wonderful experience to be able to feel like we finally were inside the gates here.
Mhm. Did you find that to be a healing experience for you?
Well, it was very positive. Felt very good about it. Yeah.
So you sort of brought up the person that I want to, we have to discuss. If we're going to discuss your life and AIDS ministry, we also have to discuss Ron.
Well, he was pivotal.
So
spiritual.
You describe him as friend, lover, and spiritual director, leader. Could you tell us some about Ron?
Sure. Terry and I, as I said, had been together for 13 years. And we were big partiers and drinkers. And on Terry's 40th birthday, which was August 26, 1986, I had a big 27 people were coming to his dinner, a surprise dinner, at a restaurant downtown Washington. And that morning, we got a call that our dear friend, Logan Soliday, who had been our neighbor and dear friend, was in intensive care at George Washington Hospital. And I went racing down to the hospital, and he's on oxygen, and I went in shock. I couldn't believe it. I sort of considered him to be like a brother. He and I were 2 days apart in birth. And I felt like he took the bullet. Anyway, I was in shock all day. And we arrived late at the dinner, and everybody was in a great mood, party mood, and I couldn't get there. Just couldn't get there. Well, that began for me the end of my drinking, because the party stopped. I didn't enjoy it anymore. But it took almost another 2 years for me to finally give it up. So in '88, I was in the thick of people dying and funerals and so on and so forth. And I was really feeling down. And three different women, two on my board, brought up the subject of my having AIDS. And I think they intuitively realized something was going on with me. And I was a little surprised. And the third one was a woman who had AIDS dementia that I'd been working with. And by that point, she couldn't stay at home any longer, and she was in the hospice that Mother Teresa had built for her sisters. And I went to see her, and she said she had heard on the radio that I had AIDS. Now, the other two friends had approached me whether I had AIDS or not. There was something about it. And so then I insist that Terry and I go off to Italy, where a friend had an apartment in Florence. And I think I was desperately trying to pump life back into the relationship. But anyway, while we were there, we were going to go to this dinner party with a group of Episcopalians. And I also loved smoking grass as I was drinking. And so I knew there wouldn't be any grass there. So I was hiding sort of down between these two little Italian cars, and it's broad daylight, smoking marijuana. And while I'm down there, I hear this voice that says, "This is pathetic." Thank God, it is pathetic. And so I announced before we left Italy that I was going to come back and cut way back on my smoking and drinking. And I did. And I mean, I was doing so much better. And within less than a month, Terry announced that he was dating somebody else and wanted into a relationship. And I was in shock about that. But yet it was like somebody just cut our mooring lines and we began to drift like this. And I kept feeling better about it, feeling better about my life, and had more energy and so on and so forth. When Ron Bushnell came roaring into my life, 28 years old, and he'd been sober for 4 years. And he was absolutely full of life. And he had been diagnosed the year before with full-blown AIDS. And he wasn't emaciated. He didn't have any real symptoms when I met him. He full of life. And he and some other people began to guide me into AA, except they weren't doing it in a concerted way. And I had made myself a promise that Christmas time, was not going to get drunk, or I wasn't going to get high. I always drink too much at Christmas time. And the first week of January, and Ron and I truly called him Ron. Terry told me that he and Chuck, his new friend, were going to go to Atlanta and visit friends of ours. Friends who'd had two daughters, both of them I had baptized. And I felt terribly violated. I felt like something was taken from me. And it happened to be a Friday afternoon on a cold, gray day in Washington. And I thought, who's having a party? I'm going to get high. And then I thought, you promised yourself. And in that moment, I called Ron and said, are you going to an AA meeting? And he said, yes. And I said, can I go? And he said, yes. And it was like scales fell from my eyes. It's like I walked from one reality to another. I mean, I'm anymore a huge respecter of denial, no matter what it's about. I mean, it's a power drug, denial is. And that began my journey into AA. Ron was, when he died, a woman who was doing AIDS mastery work, where she worked with guys with AIDS and help them change their attitudes. She said, Ron Bushnell was the most alive person I've ever met, and it was true. And I say danced for 2 years and 3 months before he died. It was an incredible day. Profoundly changed my life.
Mm. So how you leave DC
Oh yes. Mhm.
and then you go to Florida.
Yeah, and create an AIDS ministry there. That was in '96, and I was there for 5 years.
And then you went to Nassau.
Oh, that trip. I was at, yeah, that's right. That's in the book. Isn't it? Yeah, while I'm in Miami in 2000, I had a priest friend who had spent tons of time in Nassau, and some of his friends were going to. I'm sorry. In 2000, they were they were trying to find a minister who would go on the radio and a talk show and debate conservative Baptist minister about homosexuality. It was in part generated by there were gay cruise ships beginning to land in the islands, and there was a huge protest by the clergy, led by the then Anglican Archbishop down there. And so anyway, they were wanting to, and they couldn't find anybody to go on the radio. Even the Unitarian ministers were afraid to. So they imported me, and I went down, and he was rather rational and reasonable until I made some comment that I felt like that one of my channels to God was through the one of my partner. He went ballistic. What I mean, studying and speaking and so on and so forth. And the interviewer ran the program 20 minutes longer because there's so many people calling in.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was taken to a gay bar with some of the locals, and a week later, a ship of lesbians arrived, 800 lesbians in Nassau, and there were several hundred protesters at the ship. And somebody shot buckshot at the front of that gay bar where I had been the week before. But then the next summer, they invited me back for their first Gay Pride Festival, which was about 50 people celebrating indoors. So I went down with a dear friend of mine, a Baptist minister who's now an Episcopal priest, and we were the spiritual presence for 4 days, and that was a wonderful experience. That was in 2001, yeah, a year later.
And then you eventually then moved to California.
I have a wonderful priest friend, Albert Ogle, who had founded an AIDS organization in Pasadena, California. In the 80s, in 88, the General Convention in Detroit, a number of us who were doing AIDS ministries around the country came together in Detroit and had a wonderful time creating the Episcopal, the AIDS Coalition, which was the National Episcopal AIDS Coalition organization and the National Episcopal
Care Response.
well, no, that was our organization in Washington. It was various ministries around the country came together, and Gene Robinson was one of the guys. So we all became very good friends, and Albert was a part of that group. And so by 2001, he knew me pretty well, and I went out there on a vacation for 2 weeks. I was supposed to go into Africa and been a part of an AIDS conference, and they disinvited me, and I was tired, and he said, oh, why don't you come out here for 2 weeks? So I went out, and while I was there, You got a townhouse overlooking the Pacific in Southern California. I maintain he's an Irish witch, but he threw fairy dust on me. Anyway, he helped me see I was exhausted, and I realized I was. And so at that time, didn't have a partner. I was burnt out, and so I moved to Southern California, and that's where my book ends.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And how has the story continued after California?
The best years of my life. I didn't have a job, but shortly afterwards, they assigned me to go to a parish for 2.5 months to be the pastoral presence until they found somebody to place there, and I was there 13 months. 2 weeks after I get there at an AA meeting, I meet a man who's very much part of my life now. That was 2001. And then the bishop in 2003 appointed me to director of pastoral care at Good Samaritan Hospital, which is the Episcopal Hospital, been around since 1885 in downtown LA. And I was there 13 years. And it was a great place for me to utilize all that I had learned and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So, your story explains the complexity of ministry in the Episcopal Church, first of all, and then, of course, with its relationship to VTS. What are your hopes for the Episcopal Church and its seminaries for the future?
Well, some of them survived. I'm grieving General Seminary. I mean, it's not the place I went to seminary. But I'm grateful to Virginia as a part of the process of trying to keep it going. I think that's wonderful. I mean, those old high church, low church barriers seem so antiquated now. And I certainly would hope that, well, I mean, I think the church will survive. I don't think, the problem is, it seems like it's surviving in places where there's real urban places. And the church in Southern Illinois that I am attached to is struggling. All the churches down there are struggling. It's very sad. But I'm very encouraged by, I mean, St. Patrick's is called an openly gay rector who started in June with a husband who is very, the rector at St. Thomas Divine Circle is very exciting, and that whole place is very exciting. The rector at St. Margaret's, I mean, those are parishes very actively involved in ministry. Very encouraging. And Virginia, seems to me, everything I hear sounds good.
I looked on my timeline, and I didn't have in my timeline when the decision was about the changing the supervisors from adjunct faculty, but I'm going to look into the faculty minutes, and I'll actually tell you when exactly that decision was made.
Yeah.
So at least then you can know whether or not,
Right.
Looking back.
It didn't somehow get articulated in a way that I heard it. Yeah.
Right. But I'll double check and get you that date.
But I still, claim that Mother Horn is a saint. And I've never met her, which is, I never had a chance to tell her that in person.
Is there anything else you would like to share that we haven't covered?
Well, I'm a little exhausted. My brain's about to close down. I'm trying to think. Did we not include something that, in regards particularly to the seminary? I don't think so. I should should say that Bishop Walker, whom I do have deep affection for, and God knows, I would have wanted his position. But he, 2 months before Ron died, before he died, Bishop Walker died in '89. I was talking to him about his giving us permission to have our relationship blessed in church. And he had said to me, well, right after service, I want to see it. And, we were spinning like crazy. And then he died in September, and that never happened. But